I'm Alethea, this is Matt.
Yeah.
And yes, we like to talk to people about the role of well-being in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the work that needs to be done, the work that's been done.
Makes sense.
Challenges. So can you give us a little intro?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm Cate Kalson. I'm the Chief People Officer at OpenCast Software, which is a tech consultancy. We're based up in Newcastle. We've got about 450 people across the UK in different kind of regions, but half our team are based in the Northeast. So we like to think of ourselves as kind of Geordies first and foremost. I guess, for me personally, my job, I guess, covers lots of different things. If you're a Chief People Officer, you've got to worry about, what everyone's going to get paid, like how many people you're going to have, what skills you're going to have, and then well-being is sort of this really important strand that links a lot of things together. But I think sometimes the risk that it links a lot of things together is it's hard to sort of make sure you're being sufficiently strategic about it. So I guess, one of the reasons I'm here today at this amazing Mad World conference is to think more strategically about, what's out there, what are different people doing. And whilst I think we do some quite cool things at OpenCast, like already I'm just learning so many more things. And I think particularly like listening to psychologists and kind of some of the people that have more of that clinical background is really interesting to me because, I think it's sometimes maybe a bit tempting to be like an enthusiastic hobbyist around well-being. But like my personal background is quite squiggly. I actually started out my career as a research scientist, as a biochemist. So like I guess I like evidence and I like to know how things are actually, evidence-based. And so I think I bring that into now being a Chief People Officer, and this space for me is one of those kind of areas of wanting to get a bit deeper into the science and the kind of evidence behind what we do and don't do in the workplace.
So when you said you need to be more the challenge is to be more strategic with it, is that because you mean you could just say well-being's everything and it becomes a little more disparate?
Or it can be seen maybe as sort of like the fluffy stuff, as well. I think sometimes maybe sort of in that kind of C-suite context, I'll get a lot of attention when it comes to pay review every year and things that really obviously hit the bottom line. But I don't tend to get that many questions from CEO, CFO, those kind of folks around, okay, well, hang on, what are we doing about well-being? Maybe if our absence is looking off, you might start to get a conversation. But I would say it feels to me like a space where as a Chief People Officer, you need to lead really proactively actually and kind of make the case for what that investment can look like, what kinds of things you can do, and also raise the awareness within the C-suite of kind of what positive benefits it can have, but also what risks not having a strategy around it can also have. So I think it's kind of not yet top of other C-suite agendas, I would say. So it's still our role to kind of bring it to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. But even the fact you've got chief in your title means that you've got a seat at the top table, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the floor is open, I guess. I think it's then about making sure, for me personally, it's like I make the space for myself to come up with those strategies and think about that even within the team, right? So there's a lady here today, Ellen Russell, my team, and she's been our facilities and kind of health and safety manager for a very long time in our organisational history. And she's really interested in this. So kind of we've just been shaping her role to say, well, why would it'd be a bit strange just to have health and safety nowadays without it being all encompassing? And so it's great to hear that that's not a crazy idea because lots of other people are sort of saying that. But then it's also, I think, about thinking about for her and her career path, like how does she then, just expand her knowledge, her network, think about different suppliers and so on. So I think, again, it's like, how do you have a strategy? Well, you also need to have the right sort of leadership of that. And, I think it's a different space to, it's a different space, it's a different role than being just a head of HR, right? Like they are related, and in our organisation, they sit in the same team, great. But I think it's acknowledging that you need to make the case for that's a person's role.
Yes. This is exactly why we created our community. So in addition to the podcast, we've got a community called Working Well, and it's exactly that's what it's for. So it was to legitimise the role of a wellbeing leader. So it's a proper thing, not just an add-on to a HR position, for example. But it was also for the individuals within there to expand their own careers, So actually one of the key things we talk about within the community, sounds like a plug for it, but it's just because of what you're talking about, is that they are members of the community as themselves. not as their business. Now, sure, they put it on their profile and people know who they work for, that's fine, but it's primarily about them. And if they moved organisations, it doesn't matter. They'd still have a place in the community. And actually, what's really important is connecting them to other people. I mean, you said you're chief people officer, so you'd think you know everything about well-being, but then you come somewhere like this and meet so many other different people, and you're like, that's interesting.
Exactly that. And I think, it exists in other disciplines, right? Like recruiters will have their recruitment networks, and L&D professionals will have their networks. And I think this is more of an emerging discipline in a workplace. And so I suppose you need to put a bit more effort into figuring that out within your team. Who's that going to be? Where does their development come from? And so on. So, I think it's, I've already got in my pile here some stuff to give to Ellen so she can have a look at your community, because I think it is that kind of learning that people get a lot of value from. And we've certainly had, your point around how do people see it is interesting, because someone in my leadership team recently said, I really want to put wellbeing in your title with the stuff. And he was like, I don't know. He was like, I feel like it's got a bit of a...
So what was his existing role? What was it?
We call him, his previous role was head of people experience.
Got you. Yeah.
Which we have a set of, it's kind of interesting, we have a set of roles within our people team, which basically share line management responsibility with some technical managers. So we have about 50 technology consultants. Yeah. They have a technical manager of whatever their discipline is. Could be user research, could be software development, could be architecture, whatever it is. And then they have we call it people experience partner, and they get called peeps, affectionately called peeps. So the peep team is also very much on the front line of people's well-being, kind of support and so on. And so actually one of the things we've done recently is Ellen is now sitting in a team together with them, because of this recognition of how much kind of synergy there is. Whereas previously she was sitting a bit separately because she was doing facility stuff. So it was a bit more disjointed. So trying to bring those things together. But it was interesting in talking to Cam and my team about the title, because it's not that he doesn't care about it, but it was almost that he had this nervousness of, that's not seen as a proper thing.
Delegitimizes,
And so I think there's probably some, reflection, on that. But in the end, essentially, we've talked about it as being people success, encompassing sort of well-being and then these other aspects. But I think it's kind of, I do think sometimes there's a little bit of a sense of well-being's like the yoga and the massage and the snacks, all of which.
At least is a yoga teacher.
Which I think, but the thing is, right, is those are components of it. And then it's also, a whole load of other things as well. And it's, a lot of the talks we've been listening to here, I think personalisation for it is so important. If you've got someone who's really stressed, it's got a big workload, they're feeling overburdened with responsibility, and you suggest yoga, not a good idea. It's not going to help them in that moment, right? Equally, if you've got someone who's more talking about, I don't really feel I've got enough things going on outside of work to relax as a more calm moment, great, suggest yoga. So I think it's a lot of things, it's the right conversations, the right suggestions at the right time. And I think that's ultimately what makes it tricky to come up with a strategy, because it's not like you're not going to fix it, right? There's no we've fixed it now, if that strategy is done. It's more of a kind of, what does the evidence tell us is going to work for our context, for our people at the moment, and then keeping evolving that over time, I guess.
And that's always changing as well, isn't it? The life cycle of what your people need.
That's fascinating, that piece about, I'll remember that, about that piece around not wanting it in the job title. I wonder how many other people have experienced that. And we talked about we did a podcast recently about the language of well-being and whether there were, so for example, wellness is gone, right? So you can't, wellness is seen as properly soft and fluffy, I think, especially in the UK. Probably not so much in the US, but over here, if you were the health, safety and wellness person, I think people would be like, what's that? Whether well-being's kind of got a little bit of that as well, but then what's the answer? Do we think of something new and fancy, or do we legitimize well-being?
I think I'm probably in that camp of the issue is probably not just to keep rebranding it. It's probably to legitimize the fact that well-being is a valuable topic, whatever you call it, and that it's not something that you should always mask to pretend you've got it. It's that sort of almost like,
Yeah.
and equally, it's not something that you should think is only achieved through fluffy stuff. You know, it's there's also, you know, I mean, yoga's not fluffy for goodness sake, is it? You know, like if you think about the depth of practice that you can go into, but I think there's a little bit of a work to do.
Well, I was actually just going to say, I feel like I can't think who it is now, but there's definitely a client or someone that in the community where they went away from well-being to experience, and then they went back to well-being in terms of the way that they kind of talked about it. So it's also a bit like, you know, I guess what's going on in the wider society around these themes, and also what resonates with that particular workforce as well. You know, for some people, to talk about well-being feels like a luxury, because actually their issues are whether or not they like can feed their children and get onto their night shift, and then who's looking after their 15-year-old whilst they're out at night doing another night shift. You know, if we're talking about workers in, you know, cleaners or people working shifts. So like, does well-being justify
almost.
Yeah, we should be talking more about their, you know, their experience and their health more explicitly. I guess that's a risk, the language debate.
I think like where I feel like I've got to with it personally is that I want to bring it much closer to our skills strategy, because I think there's this nice crossover that's definitely not fluffy, which is like around the skills of mindset and how you know, it's almost like that's your sort of individually, that's something that you will never regret building. So if you can build skills to deal with things that are difficult and to see things positively even when they're not positive, you know, and or at least look for opportunities where things are really challenging. It's the stuff that is very easy to say we want in our employees. We want people that are resilient, or we want people that can, you know, go into a complex environment and find a path through it, and all these things that are very valuable skills. And so many of those are the sort of same skills that you're talking about also with sort of like looking after your emotional mental health through your life. So that's kind of, I guess one of my strategic things at the moment is we've been doing some work with an organisation called the Skills Builder Partnership, Skills Builder Partnership, and they have an essential skills framework which is used, was developed for education first, but it's a universal framework for all ages now, and it's got a track around. They're currently calling it staying positive and aiming high. I think that language may evolve because they're sort of evolving the framework at the moment. But fundamentally, it's a really good way of like showing that these skills are buildable, just like other skills, just like communication skills, leadership skills. You can break them down. You can have them in your kind of competency frameworks as an organisation, and then you can proactively talk to people about how to build those skills. And then maybe in the moments of them realising that they're struggling, or they're not sure they want to go for a promotion, or they're feeling overwhelmed by a responsibility, it's sort of like there's a shared language of saying, oh, hey, like, does that actually relate a little bit to these skills? And therefore, is there something we can do to support you in the moment, but also more generally to build those skills? And so I guess that's sort of one of my things at the moment is, how do we bring well-being much closer to development practice?
Helping people to recognise the link between the two. So then that introduces the thing is like you need your employees to be in a receptive space, so that they can, you know, you can provide all of the framework and training and education that you want as the employer, but unless the employee is ready to come on that journey, then
exactly. And I think that's where like
difficult.
Our peeps, which are basically their, you know, trained coaches, like I guess a lot of their role is sort of knowing what place that person's in. So what do they need at that moment? Like I say, like there's a moment for different things and different moments of need. And so I think, if someone's in the middle of what is, you know, a very difficult situation, either work or home or both or whatever, like the primary objective is usually just to like reassure them, figure out practically what support you might offer and so on. If, however, they are thinking more about their career, having a career conversation, but they've got concerns about their capacity to take on more responsibility or whatever, for me there might be linkages there. And also if you know the person over time, you might be able to see, because I can see how certain situations you do find really exhausting or energy draining, and then that's also what's getting in the way of you thinking you can do this other thing. And so but it's when to choose the moment to say like, oh, well, like, is that a skill that you're interested in working on? Do you think that would help you? Do you think that could help you to move forward? So that in itself is a skill to coach that. And I think that's I guess the reason why we have these two roles. We have like technical managers and our peeps is because we recognise that kind of coaching skill set is quite specialised in itself. And so we don't expect our like software engineering gurus to also be coaches that can like pick the right moment for different types of wellbeing conversation. We do expect them to have some awareness, but it's almost like specialising again in these different ways. So it's all a work in progress. But yeah, I think
I was going to ask on that actually. That's weird you mentioned that. I was going to say there's a completely different question, but now you've kind of segued me into it nicely. So one of the things that I see talked about quite a lot is this idea of different career tracks based on skills.
Yeah.
So for example, I was going to ask it because you work in a software company, and I was going to try not to be stereotypical, but I'm assuming you've got some people who are great in front of a computer and coding and all the rest of it. And the risk is I've seen in other similar organizations that they reach a point where they can't progress in the organization without, for example, taking on people management responsibility. And they, by their own admission, that's not something that they're very good at and they don't want to do, but they do anyway, and then that leads to its own problems. Have you explored, or do you do tracks where people can progress in the organization without having to take on, for example?
Yeah, we do. So we basically have like a leadership track that is more focused on if you're actually interested in leading and motivating others and that sort of, and bringing that with a technical lens, sure. But then we have more of a track, I guess, of individual kind of contribution focused, kind of being more of a technical kind of thought leader. Cool. I think it.
And can they earn as much as the leaders, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, like I think so. Yeah, we have we have our salary bands. We have sort of lead consultants and the practice leads. The practice leads are more like the managers, and the lead consultants are out there working as individuals. I think what can be a bit of a reality check for people is that to get their thought leadership across, they may need to work on some of the skills around communication and influencing people, even if they're not managing people. So we primarily work with clients, and so I think again it's this interesting thing of opening up with someone a conversation around why do you feel that you can't, or that you build those skills not necessarily to the same level as someone who that's their primary sort of skill set almost. So I think it's trying to kind of, I guess, stay in that space of growth mindset with it. And so
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I should check the way I asked that question actually, because I'm not for 1 second suggesting that this is a type of people who can't speak to anybody and should sit in a dark room on their own. I'm not suggesting that, but like you say, they don't want it to be the primary part of their role. And one of the things that I hear quite a lot, I was running a leadership session a few weeks ago, and there was a really interesting point. This person came up towards the end of the session, and he said, do you know what the realization has been? Is that this leadership bit, managing people, is my job. He was like, I've just always seen it as the extra bit that I don't really want to do.
Yeah.
and I'm doing my job, and then I have to lead people as well. And he was like, no, this is my job, like it or not. And then he's got a decision to make, right? If he doesn't like that, well then find another job where it's less of. But I think he was of the opinion of, I can do that, but I just need to lean into it a little bit more.
Yeah. And also how you frame it is so important. So I've definitely had conversations with people that are, well, I don't want to be a line manager. I'm like, well, let's define, what do you mean by that? And then they kind of tell you some things that doesn't fill them with joy. And then I kind of often say, well, do you know how I frame managing people? It's like I frame it as having a set of relationships with a set of people where I'm really interested in their work. I want to help them do their best work. And I want to be able to encourage them to be creative and innovative, and then I want to tell people about that. And then they're like, well, I want to do that. And I'm like, well, that is one way of thinking about it, And then you sort of say, twice a year you might have to fill in a few appraisal forms, or because there are some administrative things to that. But I think if you, and not everyone builds relationships in the same way, right? So again, it's not about being like other people necessarily, but it's, often you'll find, there's absolutely followership going on in technical communities with people that spend a lot of time not necessarily talking to each other, but they're communicating, for example, in messenger forums and so on. So if you sort of go into a community and you ask them, well, who do you see as a leader? Like, can be someone who, if you were just visibly watching a group, you'd have no concept, but everyone all day is going to them.
And they wouldn't identify themselves as a leader. Yeah.
But it's a different, so they're not standing up on stage necessarily, or going around giving people hugs, or I don't know, whatever. You might have some different concepts of like nurturing management style, but the people they're managing don't want that either. So I think it's this interesting thing of sort of encouraging people to like be themselves more. So like lean into what you like, but then add some skill to that. So if it's going to stop you doing what you want to do, if you are afraid of managing people, well, maybe try it with one or two, and maybe you'll start to learn that you're actually brilliant at it, but in your way. And so I think it can be a blocker. People are like, I don't want to do that. It's really stressful, and that's okay. But when you get under the skin of it, sometimes they're like, okay, and then can turn out to be, brilliant managers. So.
Kate, can I ask you a question for our aspiring people leaders?
Yeah.
Sort of feeling that you are a pretty incredible people leader. Just the vibes in the last 15 minutes. What are the kind of most important skills that you think that you use in your job to do everything you've got to do?
I think like relationship building is so valuable. And I mean that in the true sense of like being curious to understand other people, and then use that to build your relationship with them. So kind of, it's that classic kind of try and listen more than you speak, kind of. So if you're talking specifically around managing people, if you listen to them, curious about them, holistically their work and them, then that's what builds them trusting you to kind of then maybe nudge them in a more sort of manager kind of way into sort of a different topic, or to go to a conference, or to like do a thing that you might think is a good idea. So I think it's sort of lead with the relationships more than the ideas. Which me personally, like I like being creative, having ideas. So I sometimes have to like, actively think what, don't lead with that, lead with. So I think that's something that I've probably learned is like, be less of the ideas person and be more of the relationship person as you kind of move into those leadership roles. And I think it's maybe a bit cheesy, but it's also like be very visible in your learning. So I kind of squiggled into being a chief people officer, having not worked my way up through HR. There's lots of things I don't know. And when I first started in that kind of role, I could feel some people thinking, well, what does she know? And I thought, well, they're kind of right. Like I don't know, but I'm confident that I can learn. And so it's sort of, but showing the workings there. So kind of very much like showing like, I've been reading this, even if it's like actually kind of basic, it's like I've been reading this because I'm not an expert, or I'm going to go and talk to this person, and just sort of putting that learning out in the open. I think that also encourages other people to think, oh, well, if you're doing it, then it's okay for me to do it. And it's actually, again, part of my job. Because I think sometimes people think that they, someone said to me once, they were like, do you listen to podcasts like in the day? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, like, would you just at work, like if you had half an hour, would you listen to a podcast? I was like, oh yeah, totally. Like I've got a list of things, like a to listen list. And then if I end up with like half an hour and I don't think I can sort of get any actual sort of task done, I might just think, right, okay, I'll go on there, what should I listen to? Let's go, let's listen to that. They were like, God, I'd never do that. And I thought, well, why not? Because it is part of your job. So I think it's a really, and they use this term of like, I don't know if I feel worthy. And I was like, that's so interesting, because we should all feel worthy to like learn and to build our skills. So I think those are probably my two things: is focus on relationships, and then demonstrate your own learning very visibly. And then those two things together are really powerful, because people start suggesting things for you to learn, and it just creates this really nice kind of sort of learning dynamic.
Levels up.
Yeah,
love that. I'm really curious about the squiggly career, but I feel like we might need to
revisit that
another time. Fascinated.
We'll get into that. Yeah, I've got some thoughts about that. I don't want to ask you, but we'll do it after.
A squiggly career podcast.
Yeah, maybe specifically. Yeah. But we better end it there. No, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was one of those ones where we both had like 25 more questions each, but yeah, it was amazing.
To be continued.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right,
Cheers.
thank you.
Cheers.